Now, big NDTV impact. The Bombay High Court has formed a 13-member panel to probe into the pigeon health impact. Remember that NDTV has been running a campaign. The Bombay High Court has asked a 13-member panel to give a report within 30 days. Like I mentioned, NDTV has been running a campaign and has in fact flagged the pigeon problem and its impact on overall health, especially respiratory problems, and even puts one at the risk for brain inflammation. Now, this of course is an important issue given the fact that the pigeon population has jumped about 150% in the past 3 decades. Well, going back to my colleague Anush at this point in time, Anush, of course, the Bombay High Court has given, it's constituted a 13-member panel and it's given the committee, of course, 30 days to constitute a report and get back to, of course, the Bombay High Court. What is it that you're reading in this situation?
Following a Bombay High Court order from 13th of August earlier this month, a 13-member panel has been set up, and it has been given a time of 30 days from their first meeting to look into the pigeon matter very seriously. We've been following about how, the entire pigeon conundrum that has been unfolding here in the city has had not just the Bombay High Court at the forefront, but also the BMC, who were in fact the first to make sure or to, direct the authorities across the city to shut down all the historical and the new age pigeon or kabutar khanas that have been there in place for the longest possible time. Following that, there was a lot of division amongst the residents of Mumbai city, where a few believe that it was their cultural heritage and their right to feed pigeons as a part of their religious activity as well, whereas many others who also cited several scientific documents claim that there have been several severe health issues that were faced by people, especially those who lived close to the kabutar khanas. Now, the BMC also was at the receiving end, especially from the Jain community representatives and monks of whom made it to the streets and gave open threats and warnings, even asking them or telling them they would not think twice before defying the law if this is not looked into with much detail. Bombay High Court for the longest possible time had a very distant view of this entire matter and gave more sort of power to the BMC. But now one can see that it has shown a direct involvement by forming a 13-member committee which involves the experts from health department, town planning committee, and also of course BMC officials, who will be given a time of 30 days primarily to look into whether the controlled feeding that was directed or that was thought of by the BMC will be any impactful when it comes to the health concerns that have been raised by residents who live in the areas where kabutar khanas have been existing for the longest possible time.
Right, Anush, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing these details with us. Well, joining me right now is health expert Dr. Adish Dhameja, who will tell us more about the pigeon problem. Now, Dr. Dhameja, I wish to understand from you, of course, the NDTV has been running a campaign and has of course urged relevant authorities to look into the pigeon problem. The Bombay High Court has finally asked a 13-member panel to give a report within, of course, 30 days. Now, help us understand what sort of a problem does, of course, this create? What sort of health hazard does the pigeon problem create? And what are some of the measures that you would suggest that one takes to, sort of tackle this problem?
Okay, so basically the problem with this overpopulation of pigeons mainly comes from the fact that it causes numerous lung diseases, which are primarily fungal in nature. So this can affect mostly children as well as elderly people and people suffering from other respiratory diseases like, say, asthma. So these people need to be especially careful. There are also people who are prone to allergic reactions, and we have seen an increased number of allergic reactions, primarily stemming from bird droppings, which pigeons are primarily responsible for in these urban areas. What happens is that when feeding occurs in highly urban, dense populated regions, most people who would otherwise not face the brunt of these diseases somehow get entangled into this mess, and then they become victims to these diseases. Also at great risk are people who are immunocompromised, which can be due to them taking certain medication or having had organ transplant in the past or having taken cancer medications. So these people are at very high risk of developing brain infection due to this problem, as well as disseminated infection, wherein this infection from the lungs spreads to the entire body, and then it is very hard to save the patients. So now that you know the risk factors, you know which people need to stay extremely careful and try to limit their exposure to these pigeons, even if no action is taken.
And also help us understand that, many times we've seen people from the society, people like you and I, who try and feed pigeons. And of course, that's probably also what helps in aggravating the problem. And that's also something that maybe even perhaps causes the population rise within them. Now, what are some safe practices or better practices that the society, especially those who are animal lovers, can adopt?
See, the primary thing and the most important thing that we need to do is to designate spots to feed pigeons that are away from urban centers. The main problem arises when people get exposed to bird droppings and birds in general. So once you are able to segregate the people and the birds, that is when the problem diminishes. Moreover, one needs to realize that when you're feeding these pigeons and you suddenly stop feeding them, they tend to feed on the garbage, they tend to feed on other food items, which in fact hinders the population of other birds, other smaller birds such as sparrows and menas, and they tend to suffer. So it is not that by feeding pigeons you are inherently, helping the birds, because somehow other birds are still suffering. So overpopulation of any animal species is going to endanger the biodiversity of the place, and that is something that needs to be understood. We are not saying that pigeons need not be fed, but they need to be fed in places where they're not interfering with humans, especially those who are at high risk.
Right, help us understand, Dr. Pigeon, you've mentioned that these places where pigeons are fed need to be away from urban centers. So do you suggest that the government or the relevant authorities should sort of allocate places where pigeons are fed? How do you expect the government to take this forth?
Oh, definitely. I believe that the government should actually highlight places which are further away from human settlements, especially settlements where we have children, elderly people, or, just swaths of people living in close proximity. These places should be designated as pigeon feeding spots, and it also helps alleviate the fears of people who feel that we are, harming the pigeon population or starving them out in a certain way. There are also ways by which you can reduce pigeon population, such as proper garbage disposal. There are also sonic repellers which emanate sound waves which keep pigeons away. So those are some measures that can be tried in high density areas to potentially stop pigeons from coming there. And if we are trying for an intervention where we want to reduce population, there are novel methods of contraception as well for female pigeons, which make sure that we are reducing their population in a humane way, and we are not actually just trying to starve them out and, encountering dead pigeons.